everyone, and welcome to the League of Women Voters Atlanta Fulton's first annual environmental talk. My name is Chenya Inora, and I am the Vice President of Programs of the League of Women Voters, and we are excited to add this vital event to our menu of programs, of informative programs. And tonight's program focuses on the 2021 Tree Program Ordinance. We are so fortunate to have our Madam President, Nicola Hines, moderate this dynamic panel with a group of experts to guide us through this complex subject of the tree program. And with that being said, I'd like to turn over this program to our Madam President and your moderator for tonight so she can introduce to you our talented group of panelists. Nicola Hines.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We're so excited to celebrate Earth Day with this important ordinance through the city of Atlanta, and also to mark our inaugural environmental talk series that we will start back up with the League of Women Voters, Atlanta Fulton County. I would like to introduce our panelists in alphabetical order. I would like to introduce Mr. Cheeks. He is owner of Fortes Homes and president of the Atlanta chapter of Greater Atlanta Homes Builders Association. We have Katherine Kolb, Executive Director of Ecodemia, and is a consultant for tree ordinance for the city of Atlanta. And we also have Chet Tisdale. He is an environmental lawyer and member of the Atlanta Tree Conservation. Welcome, panelists, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me on Earth Day.
Thank you so much for this important talk. We really appreciate you putting this together.
No, thank you. So if each one of you can just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you're involved with this particular ordinance that's coming through the city of Atlanta, and just a little bit maybe about your organizations that you represent and talk about. We can start. Yeah, Mr. Tenzel, you can go the opposite way.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you for having us on this important day. I'm an environmental lawyer and a member of the Tree Conservation Commission. And what I saw is that the current ordinance is not protecting Atlanta's trees, and we'll talk about that. And the Atlanta Planning Department came up with several drafts. And sadly, each of these drafts was unworkable. So I looked around to try to find some people who had expertise in tree protection ordinances and love trees. And I put together what's called a citizens group. Katherine Kolb is a representative of the city in the forest, is a very key representative of the group and has been working on tree ordinances for many years. We also have other nonprofit tree advocacy groups. We have developers, we have an arborist, naturalists, some lawyers, and other professionals. And it's a group of citizens, not paid by anyone, who have given their time to develop a tree ordinance. The city council saw this in June of 2020, liked what we did, and directed the planning department to work with us. So we've been negotiating with the planning department for months on a new ordinance. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but that's basically the background. Because of the trees are Atlanta's most precious natural resource. And so I was drawn to find and form a group of people who had an interest in this that would be balanced and diverse, that could develop a good ordinance.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Tisdale. Ms. Kolb?
Thank you. Sure. Thank you, Chet. So I've been working on tree ordinances for a long time because I felt that we often are presented in this particular issue with a kind of a false choice. We're often said, well, we have to have progress and we have to have building, and we can't have trees at the same time. We're often told that we can't have both. And I felt that we can and should have both. And you know, it's not rocket science, but we need to roll up our sleeves and figure out a way to make this work. So I have been involved in working with other, architects, builders, arborists, people who understand how the industry works. Howard Katzman, who's not on the call right now, is a retired builder, and figuring out how can we do this. And we feel very good that we have come up with a balanced way to approach it so that we actually can preserve more existing trees. That's what we don't want to see, is these really big, nice trees come down all the time. And we get, little plantings along the street or something like that, that really aren't the equivalent. So I really have focused and about 20 years of work on this in different jurisdictions on trying to come up with a balance that really works.
And last but not least, Mr. Cheeks.
Again, thank you. Happy Earth Day to everyone. Thank you for having me on this panel. Been spending a lot of time with Katherine and Chet over the last few months. We've had, I think, 5 in-person meetings or 5 meetings. We're really trying to get to a place with this new ordinance. I think our goals are the same. Maybe the methodology for getting there was probably different. But I've been building for a few more years than the current ordinance has been in force. And I feel that like I think Chet and Katherine, that the current ordinance isn't doing it, isn't doing what we need to do to preserve and plant. So we've been meeting many times, having, I think, a very open and strong dialogue, even when there are differences. I would say that I enjoy spending time with Chet and Katherine, and we're just hopeful that we can get to a place where we can protect more trees and still continue to develop like we need to. Density is a big issue in the city of Atlanta. Supply of housing is being far outstripped by demand, which is the reason why prices are going up so much. Just today on the way home from work, I heard on NPR that the new medium home price in the U.S. is $329,000, the highest it's ever been. So with that, I'd like to get started.
Well, thank you. And that actually leads right into our first question. So the first question is, why is an update to the Atlanta Tree Protection Ordinance, TPO, is needed? And what has changed since 2001, the last time it was updated? And how's the current TPO not meeting the city's needs? So it's kind of a 3-part question.
All right, I'll start. The ordinance that's currently in force was passed in 2001. At the time, it was progressive, but it doesn't provide enough standards to preserve trees. And we are losing trees in Atlanta at an alarming rate. We're the 5th worst city in the US in terms of tree loss. We're the 3rd worst city in the US in terms of temperature rise. And 2020 was a record year for Atlanta for losing trees. So we have to have a new ordinance to preserve our most precious natural resource.
I can add on to that a little bit, and that is that the current tree ordinance, when it was formed, they thought that having a kind of an expensive cost to cut down trees would actually serve as a deterrent for tree loss. But we found that that's not really the case, because real estate prices have risen so quickly that even if it costs, $5, $6, even maybe sometimes $10,000 or $12,000 to cut down a tree or a couple of trees, it's really a cost of doing business. And so what we're finding is that we're not really saving our trees, and we don't really have any requirement to preserve it. The current ordinance really does not have much of a requirement at all to do any kind of preservation. So what we're trying to do is do a balance between preservation and replanting. So that's kind of where we were, and we're trying to move ahead now to kind of the next generation of tree ordinances.
Do you want to add? Okay.
Yeah, so I would add that and I think my opinion personally, and I think the Home Builders Association more generally, and we can't leave out sort of the typical homeowner that wants to add an addition or do something like that, that the current ordinance, as Katherine said, was they figured if they put a fine in, it would reduce the amount of impact on trees. And I would totally agree that that's not the case. What we see as the biggest problem with the current ordinance is that the money that does get paid into the tree fund, which is separate money that the city has to use to plant trees, and recently they changed it to allow to buy forested land, which I, as an individual, and I think the organization supported. It has not done what it needs to do to encourage people like me to plant back. And had that been the case 20 years ago, we would be in a much different place than we are now. There's currently roughly $9 million in the tree trust fund, and I think that's unacceptable. Not that people like me have paid into that fund to make it that high, but that money is sitting there in an account and not doing anything for the trees. So one of the things that we're pushing for is more robust planting of trees. You know, I think one of the biggest differences I would have with Katherine and Chet, and one of the things that we're really trying to work through is when we talk about trees, what we're ultimately talking about is the canopy. And is it the canopy today? Is it the canopy in 5 years? Or is it the canopy in 10, 15, or 20 years? You know, if we look at the tree ordinance in sort of a 20-year increment, just because that's easy to say, had we done it better initially, we would have been in a much better place today.
Thank you so much. So, you know, I'm going to ask this question since, you know, we're talking about the canopies, and are we talking about, you know, today, or are we looking in the future? How does the TPO fit into the city's sustainability goals, into the environmental goals more broadly?
I'd like to maybe start on that one. When people talk about canopy, I appreciate that talk, but trees are not just canopy. And it's really, if you really want to get where the rubber meets the road on the importance of our ecosystem and sustaining our ecosystem, it's in the soil. The soil is where it's all happening. The city of Atlanta is very rare for a major city. And I do these kind of educational talks all the time. We were an old growth forest as late as 1821. We were Muskogee Creek territory. That is late in the game. We were a teeny tiny little urban area, very small. There was an intersection of the railroads until the 1960s. So we have, it's sort of like a patchwork quilt landscape, but in Metro Atlanta, we have pockets of old growth remnants in neighborhoods, in backyards. And the key to that is the soil. When we talk about City of Atlanta being a city in the forest, the backbone of that forest are these older forest pockets that are made possible really by accidents of history. And that's what we find that we're losing. And once you if you cut the trees and you don't destroy the soil, those trees will grow back. The diversity of species will grow back, and they'll grow back much healthier, even if you plant new trees, because those rich soils full of all these mycorrhizal fungi and special organisms that kind of keep that urban forest healthy are there. Once you scrape that topsoil away and you just plant trees back, that forest is gone. You no longer have a functioning forest. So I'm very interested in ensuring that to sustain a healthy environment in Atlanta, we've got to sustain these urban forest areas, the healthy ones. And that can be a part of the ordinance. It's not going to be the whole part, but we can certainly incorporate that. And some of the things that we've included in our draft of the ordinance value some of those species that tell us they're indicators that we have high value soils. And we want to set those pockets aside even when we develop in other areas.
Does anyone else want to add to that?
Yes, I think it's particularly on Earth Day. We look at the environment as air, water, and land, and how do trees fit within that environment? Trees are the primary foot soldier in addressing all sorts of complex environmental problems. First, they cleanse the air, and we have severe air pollution in Atlanta. Second, trees absorb stormwater and filter pollutants out of that so that we don't have pollutants in waters. And then third, trees add so much to our land, to the value of our land, to people's well-being, both their health and also to the economy. They add so much to Atlanta's economy. People look at Atlanta, they fly into Atlanta, they see our tree canopy. And as Katherine said, because we are the only city with the old growth forest, trees are an essential part of our environment and our need to become and remain sustainable. They are other than water, I think our most precious natural resource in Atlanta.
I think the tack that, as it relates to sustainability and the ordinance, I challenge anybody to, when you look in your backyard or drive down just about any road, whether you're on Tuxedo up in Buckhead or Tuckawanna, there's a tremendous problem with invasives. And typically those are on, they can be on you know, well-maintained single-family homes in every neighborhood in Atlanta. But where the problem is most severe is in undevelopable areas, typically floodplain or areas with steep grade. And those are areas that people don't tend to take care of. I've been advocating for more than 3 years now to use some of the recompense, I mean, the tree recompense, the tree trust fund money to fund the development of nonprofits to teach people how to, especially people that are out of work, how to do this work and to remove invasives from these types of areas. One of the ideas, well, as I was, getting over on this and really trying to educate myself, I kept looking up and I was saying, oh my gosh, look at the English ivy or the kudzu on those trees. And after a few years, I realized it's not so much the trees up there, although that's terrible. When you look to the ground, you see nothing. There's no new growth. There's no ability for, naturally occurring trees to grow. And that to me is a significant problem, one that we could address that would help the canopy, the current canopy, the future canopy, would be a win for a nonprofit and putting many people back to work and a great use of the tree trust fund money.
Thank you. So, talking about, we're obviously talking about Atlanta, but Atlanta we are the largest city of this state, but a lot of people live also outside the city. So when you're driving outside the limits of Atlanta, and the decrease in the number of trees are apparent in Atlanta. And as many of you guys have already said, our tree protection ordinance is unique in Georgia. What about in other major cities in the US? I mean, if you're comparing like major cities, like, I think Miss Katherine and I were just talking about us from being up north. And, you had mentioned about, our temperatures are getting hotter because we are having less trees and less, the environment is effective. And we're coming from up north. So you have like New York, and you have Boston, and you have Chicago, and you have San Francisco and LA. I mean, LA with the smog, that's a whole nother environmental conversation. But, how do we compare with other major cities?
I actually did a book review on Jill John's book on urban forestry in America, and it's really interesting because it's so different in Atlanta. And for lack of a metaphor, in so many of our older cities that built very densely back in the 1800s when people traveled by foot or they had horse and cart, so that even cities that built late like us, like the West Coast cities like Seattle and San Francisco, there's still very, very dense urban cores. And in terms of nature, the patient is dead. I mean, it's gone. And now what these cities have to focus on is how do we get a little bit of something back? Like New York's High Line is like that, right? It's a big bridge that we've turned into a natural area. They don't have much to work with. The thing that's so special about Atlanta is the patient is alive and well. We have the opportunity not to kill the patient if we take care now. We can have our cake and eat it too. We don't have to densify the way people did back in the 1800s and the early 1900s. So I think Atlanta, it is a different set of circumstances. And I think we have a tremendous opportunity now that other cities have lost.
Anybody else want to chime in on that? Katherine, I think you're the expert on that one.
Right.
Yeah.
That's okay. Well, I'm going to go back to you, Katherine, because you mentioned before about, our generational trees. One change to the new draft of the TPO is the concept of priority trees, defined as most ecologically important trees. Can you elaborate what makes a priority tree based off of this draft?
Yes. So basically, you know, realistically, I mean, we have to be practical. We can't save all the trees. I mean, I might want to, but that's not realistic. We need to build. We're going to build. You know, we're going to have to cut some trees down. So given that we are going to be cutting down some trees, why don't we save the best trees? So what we did in our draft is we identified very long-lived species. Some of our oaks are living 500, 600, 700 years. They would get a higher rating perhaps than, you know, maybe a water oak that's only living about 150 to 200 years. So it gets a higher rating. We also rate rarer species a little higher because they are indicators of those older forest soils, like sourwoods, for instance. You know, they never are just going to come up in a graded yard. They are a remnant of higher value soil. So when we save those trees, we're saving those soils. And guess what? Those are also absorbing stormwater better. And they also serve, after, you know, trees pass away, as better incubators of new trees and forest. So we have a kind of, and then we identified it. We worked with Tirson Butte tree to identify what we felt was the right sizes of those. So, you know, it's maybe high value at 16 inches DBH, but it becomes excellent value at 22 inches DBH, something like that. So that was kind of how we approached it. And age and species were important categories.
Okay. Anybody else would like to chime in on that about the priority trees?
Yeah, I would. So my company is essentially an affordable housing company. We build at 120% AMI and lower, even in some 60%. So we're typically building in areas that have been disinvested for, you know, 40, 50, 60, maybe 100 years. Those areas were predominantly disinvested because of government action by redlining and other incredibly destructive policies. And so what's happened in a part of town that has parts of town that have not had investment for all those years, many things, but one of the things is trees have had a chance to grow, right? So when you look at the ability to develop, it's very complicated, right? I understand, and I love big trees. I've had to cut down some big trees to build affordable housing and to build some non-affordable housing. But the priority tree focus in both the city draft and the citizens draft, while the goals are good, we have to balance that against fairness. And one would think that it would be as simple as saying, okay, in certain parts of town that have been disinvested for terrible reasons, we'll look at things differently. You can't do that because of state law. So it's a challenging subject when if you just look at it from trees, or you just look at it from density, if you just look at it from fairness, you're going to come up with three different outcomes. And so we've just got to do the best job that we can of putting those outcomes together and creating the best ordinance possible.
Appreciate that.
Could I answer that just a tiny bit, if that's okay?
Okay.
Because what we did, we're not just looking at the trees. In our draft, what we did is we created what we originally called a sustainable footprint, so that a builder such as Mr. Cheeks is guaranteed an area to build that he can probably, it's probably plenty of square footage, I think, for the type of things that you're building or that anyone would build. And so if there are trees in that area, they're allowed to come down. We put that in our draft. So this is basically what we found is happening in Metro Atlanta. We used to build modest sized homes, and we used to not grade the whole lot. We would just build a foundation. So what's happening in Metro Atlanta, and this is happening in neighborhoods everywhere, we're tearing down that small house and we're putting up a much larger house. And when we put up that much larger house, it's really convenient for builders to grade most of that lot, even though they don't have to. So what we in the city actually came up with, which I think is a good step in the right direction, we said, fine, go ahead and build that house. We're not limiting the amount of impervious area. We are keeping that the same. The impervious area is the size of your house, your garage, your driveways and all of that. But what we are going to limit is that extra envelope of grading, which is what's taking down all the trees. So what we try to do is come up with a balance so that builders are guaranteed an envelope of building that should be sufficient in each zoning district to put up a nice big house, just not grade the rest of the property along with it. That's kind of where we came from there.
Okay. Well, I think, since we're talking about building and developing, I'm going to shoot this question directly first to Mr. Cheeks, to Jim. So one of the hottest debates aspects of the proposed TPO was an incentive for developers of multifamily projects that include a certain percentage of affordable housing. Those developers could apply for a reduction in the number of trees they needed to replant or amount paid to the city's tree fund. How should a city balance environmental concerns with affordable housing concerns? Is the tree canopy the right thing to compromise on to incentivize affordable development?
So that's really two-part question. I'm not a multifamily developer, so I don't really know, although I have had discussions about having something similar for affordable single-family housing development. But, I think that's a conversation that we have to have. If you can look at it differently than I mentioned it a moment ago in terms of fairness because of past wrongs and current wrongs, quite frankly. You have had the ability to build within an area, right? The government has restricted where you can build because of zoning. If you restrict that further, while there might be ways to do it that become acceptable, that's really the heart of what the council has. Your question is really the heart of what the council has to grapple with when agreeing on a final draft, whether it's for affordable housing or not, whether it's just the overall what I would like to refer to as the Canopy Protection Ordinance. And I think we'll have to see where they go. Council people in certain parts of the city have a completely different take on the trees. In fact, I remember in the work session, one council person, I don't remember who exactly it was, that said, we're having priority trees, but what about priority people? And I'm not getting involved in that. That's way above my pay grade. But it is something that is why we elect these people to have the outcome that they as leaders think is best.
I would like to comment on that too, if I could.
Sure.
So what we did, our group, we created the Citizens Blended Draft, and we very much respect these types of conversations. So we've been very solution oriented. So for the exact question that you pose, this is the solution we came up with. For affordable housing, we give them a break on recompense, but we still make you replant. So if you're doing affordable housing, you would get a break in the amount that you had to pay to the tree trust fund. So that's a financial incentive. But we don't give you a break in not having any trees planted because people are living in these places. And we need trees where people are living. So we kind of came up with what I think is a good solution in the blended draft, where you get, yes, a break on recompense, but you don't get a break on replanting or on some kind of tree save area.
So what we've been doing in this to try to look at both the citizen blended draft and the city's current draft is taking current plans and looking at what would happen. We've not seen analysis yet of the citizens blended draft on most of the ones, but we've had a number done with the city, and there is one of the projects that comes to mind where the recompense for a lot that had not been built on for at least 60, 80 years, so nothing had been there. There is something called the maximum recompense, which is the amount you pay into the trust fund is based upon the size of the lot and the amount of that lot that you disturb. In this case, it was $786. In the city's draft, it was $14,500. That is, I think, something that also too council will have to grapple with.
I think Mr. Tisdale, I was gonna say
Yeah,
you.
if I could add one final point. I think it is appropriate to offer incentives to people who are developing affordable housing. And that's a part of the citizens group blended draft. There's one other very important point, and it's where we differ from the planning department draft. The planning department for multifamily properties, including affordable housing, has no tree preservation requirements. So that someone under the planning department, the city planning department approach, could build a multifamily apartment unit, not be required to preserve trees. We believe strongly that people who live in multifamily apartments, including particularly children, need trees. And so we have tree preservation requirements in our draft. That's a big difference between the citizens group blended draft and the city. We see that trees are so important to kids and to people, and we should not have an apartment project without trees.
Well, Mr. Tisdale, Chet, you actually are rolling right into my next question. This is actually about your draft.
Okay.
So, this drafting process has been going on for 2 years.
Yes.
And I understand that you did present an alternative draft that Trees of Atlanta recently announced its support of the TPO if certain amendments were included based off of your draft. Where do you currently stand in terms of the tree protection ordinance that will be voted on next month? Like if it went on, if they had to vote, no more changes, no more amendments, where do you stand on it?
Okay, that's a very good question. Thank you. The city planning department's January 2021 draft contains many ideas that came from our draft and came from our discussions. And so there's a lot of very good provisions in there. But if you take away nothing from tonight, I would say 2 points. Number one, the crisis in tree loss. But number two, the planning department draft allows a developer to cut down 50% of the priority trees on a lot, even if the developer does not need to cut down any trees to build the house that the developer wants to build. We strongly oppose that. We know of no reason why someone should be allowed to remove priority trees unless it's necessary. If someone has a lot and they're building a bigger house and there's a priority tree right by the house, sure, you can remove it to build your bigger house. But to say, as the planning department's draft says, that you can cut up to 50% of the priority trees down, even if you don't need to, that will ruin Atlanta's tree canopy. And there's no logical reason for it, but it is in there. And we are very much opposed to it. And we want to try to educate the public, because we believe that if people are educated, they will say to the city, don't allow people to cut down priority trees unless they need to. It just seems obvious. And one final point, there was a work session on February 17. And before that work session, people called in and left voicemails. There were 242 voicemails. Over 90% of those voicemails supported the citizens group blended draft, and they opposed the planning department draft. And I think largely for the reason I just stated, allowing someone to cut down priority trees when they don't need to is no way to prepare a tree ordinance.
Thank you.
I'd like to just add one thing. I think people don't necessarily realize exactly what that means when you can cut down a number of stems. Basically, when we talk about cutting down trees in the planning department draft, when they say stems, it really means the trunk of a tree. So you're allowed to take down, let's say, 50% of the trees on a lot. But because they only measure it in stems, they make a large tree is the same value as a small tree. So let's say you had 5 trees on a lot, and 2 were really big and 3 were really small. You can take down that 50%, and even though you're taking down maybe 40% of the trees, you're actually taking 70 or 80% of the canopy. And we think that's a terrible way for that ordinance to be written. We do everything by DBH. which means that higher value is placed on a larger tree than a smaller tree.
Thank you. How about you, Mr. Cheeks, Jim?
Yeah,
You
so
vote today. How do you feel about
I'm not an expert on tree ordinances anywhere near Katherine or Chet. I would say I'm an expert on building, and you know the ultimate ordinance that gets voted on. It's our position and my personal prayer, quite frankly, is that when we do get to a final draft, because I think the city doesn't feel like their draft is final, maybe the citizens group feels like their draft is final, but whatever that is, we really need to understand what the outcomes are going to be. We made a mistake when we adopted the first draft. I think the three of us, Katherine and Chet, agree that the ordinance as it was written 20 years ago wasn't the best ordinance that it could be. We want to understand what the outcomes. We don't want council to vote on something that they don't fully understand. It's bad public policy. It's what we're describing to every council person that will talk to us. I don't personally think that either of the ordinances are going to be have an outcome that will be fair, but that's not for me to decide. That's for the council to decide.
Well, and that's a good point, because, you know, currently it's scheduled for City Council to vote on May 17th, which is only a couple of weeks from now. What should Atlantans do to express their support or concerns about the tree protection ordinance before then?
I think that's a great question. What we would hope, and the one reason for this, is to try to educate people to the fact that there is the citizens group blended draft, there is the planning department draft, there are also the Trees Atlanta amendments, but the Trees Atlanta amendments will not correct the major flaw with the planning department draft, which is this cutting down priority trees. And what we tried to do in the citizens group blended draft is just not offer a competing draft. Probably 80 to 85% of our draft is the city's language. We've used their language wherever we could because we worked on it with them. But what we had to do was fix major flaws. I've identified one, and there are a few more. And so ours is really not we're not competing against the city. Ours, in effect, fixes the city. And we've gotten broad public support already. And so I would urge people to review the citizens group blended draft and review the planning department draft and make up their minds. And we feel confident that the citizens of Atlanta will support the citizens group blended draft. And one final thing, the citizens group was formed because I really wanted to get people with some expertise, but also just citizens who are interested. None of us is paid. All of us have been working diligently for over a year. And we do that because we see the value, and we also see that the citizens of Atlanta care about trees. They've been enforcing the ordinance. They've been calling in to the city, and they're asking for a better ordinance.
Yeah, you know, a lot of people aren't experts in tree ordinances, but there's some really simple, basic things that everybody can understand. We actually have a clause that preserves some trees. It's not going to preserve them all. In fact, I think if a lot of folks studied our ordinance, people would find a lot of developers would like some of the things that we're doing. We instituted a new process called the pre-application conference, so that developers actually have an opportunity to identify what trees to build around, rather than way later in the process when it would be very costly to build around a tree. So we have put a lot of thought into this. I mean, architects, we've had builders and developers who have advised us on how things can work. We are very confident that our draft will be the tree ordinance that Atlanta really needs at this moment in history. We're very confident about that. And we invite anyone to ask us more questions, to work with us. The planning department draft, as it is right now, is full of flaws that you just don't find until you really look through it. The planning department draft forces developers, for instance, to plant too many trees that will never fit on a lot. And then it requires them to go plant them on private property somewhere. And then there's no way to know whether those trees are even going to be there, 3 years down the line. There's a clause in the planning department draft that says there's an exemption from tree planting for what is called small projects on commercial sites. They define a small project as 20% of the site. Well, on a 10-acre site, that's 2 acres, right? That's considered a small project that you can absolutely clear cut and not plant back. The planning department draft, which some people are advocating to use the planning department draft, is chock full of really big flaws that are not going to get us where we need to go. Just as Chet said, we adopted most of the planning department draft, and they did institute some new things that we support. We took what they had, we kind of got out some of the loopholes. They're just kind of crazy, and we cleaned up the language, and we have a simpler, smoother, more ergonomic way to approach this stuff. And I think honestly that a lot of builders, if they took more time to learn about what we're doing and work through site plans with us, would see that it's a really good approach, and it does come up with that balance.
This is an issue that is difficult for people to grab a hold of until it affects them. So it's the reason why, Chet said that 90% of the 200+ calls were in support. I mean, I get that. Nobody likes it when a tree's cut down. I don't like it, but I do believe that if we don't, again, going back to what I said previously, if we don't really analyze whatever the final ordinance is before it's adopted, which we can't do by May 17th, that we won't make good public policy. So there are definitely some things that Katherine and Chet have put in the ordinance that are excellent. The pre-application conference, while we're been talking a lot about the details, quite frankly, is something that I've been doing almost my entire career. I've gone to any number of arborists with a project and talked about, should we have it here? Would it be better here? Not every builder does that. I get it. When I spoke at the work session a few months ago, I led with we as builders can do a better job building around trees and with trees. That it goes without saying. Again, it'll be interesting to see what the council agrees to. But again, to go back to your initial question was what can citizens do? Until you have a project that you want to do, whether it's a brand new big McMansion ugly house or a handicap ramp for your ailing mother, until the ordinance affects you personally, you're not going to get excited about it. There's certainly going to be more people that are interested in doing whatever we can to save more trees, and I get it. That's why I think this whole process is incredibly complicated, and I hope we get it right.
Appreciate
it. Can I say one final thing on what can citizens do? I think that a citizen can review the blended draft and the planning department draft, and we also have a summary and a comparison table, which will help, and look at it and actually make an informed judgment. People are doing that, and they are saying in large part, we're in favor of the citizens group blended draft, and they're saying that to their city council people. So that's what we ask people to do. First, educate yourself, and then call or email your city council representative or any other member on the city council that you know, and express to them your views, your ideas. We hope you say you're in favor of the citizens group blended draft, but if you say I'm in favor of the planning department draft, that's your right. We want people to be educated, because I think if the citizens of Atlanta are educated, then that will really help the city council pass an ordinance that Atlanta can be proud of.
Can I add one thing?
Sure.
So the current tree ordinance is 32 pages. The city draft is 64 pages. And I don't know exactly how many the blended citizen draft is, but I think it's over 100. It's going to be hard to educate yourself on and truly understand it. So it really comes down to sort of the big picture, right? And the big picture is saving trees. And that's something that we all want. I don't know anybody that doesn't want that. The question is, at what cost? Where do we put the priority? So yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Well, just one final thing. Someone can read our summary and they can see the major points. And I do think we have tried to balance development and tree preservation because they should not conflict. And we've always felt very strongly, that's why we've had developers involved in our group, always felt very strongly that we cannot stand in the way of good development, but we have to protect trees. And sadly, the planning department doesn't seem to want to protect trees.
I was going to say, our key thing as obviously as League of Women Voters, Atlanta Fulton County, one of our key thing is educating voters. And, I appreciate there is a summary. As you just said, the community blended is over 100 pages, the city's 60 some pages, and the current bill is 32 pages. And, weighing out the pros and cons and really just coming from I know it's not a partisan, but a nonpartisan type of view where you're putting all the views and putting it all together side by side helps citizens deeply. As we're dealing with that constantly with the laws currently, with the state laws, you'd have to go through a 96 page and break it down for people because, they'll stop at the first page and you're like, no, there's 96 more pages with, 40 some sections. So, you have to break it down for people, but education is definitely key. With that, I know, we said it's scheduled for May 17th, regardless if it passes or doesn't passes. How do you think the city is going, or what's a good route for the city to measure the success or the failure of this ordinance? I mean, is it going to be the amount of canopies? Is it going to be community satisfaction? Or do you think it should be something else that they should use as a measurement? Because, they're going to have to measure this at some point.
Yeah. I think it's both. I think first, we need to protect our canopy. We know we're losing canopy. We've got to reverse that. But second, it's also community satisfaction. Homeowners have to have the ability to, with the new ordinance, if they have an issue with a tree, get satisfaction. One thing we didn't mention is we put in there, and the city's agreed with us, a fund for low-income property owners. If they think they have a tree that is dead, diseased, or hazardous, is about to fall on their house, they can call the city arborist who come out for free. They don't have to fill out forms. He'll come out for free, evaluate the tree, he or she will. If it needs to be cut down, the city will use this fund to cut it down, and they'll also provide for replanting. So, because we are sensitive to the fact that many low-income people are concerned about hazardous trees and they need some help. So that's in there as well. But I think the key point is that people have to be satisfied that if they have a problem with the tree, the new ordinance will solve that problem better than the current ordinance. A developer has to be satisfied that if the developer wants to build on a piece of property, he's got a good objective standard and he knows what he can do when he goes to the arborist, puts trees first in this pre-application conference. It makes it easier to develop the land. And so what we've tried to do is take the problems that we see that homeowners have and the developers have and the tree protection advocates have and address each of those in a way that will be logical and simpler. Now, our draft is not over 100 pages, it's actually less. But we've really tried to make sure that we've got a process that will work for everyone.
Yeah, what we've done, ours is not 100 pages. And one of the reasons that we created some appendices, which is we actually organized the draft a little bit better. So the kind of the basic requirements are easier and clearer to read than the cities. And we put a lot of that information in appendices because that's really only what people who are building need to read when they get to the specs of, how many feet you need to be from here and that. So a lot of that, a lot of those extra pages are in those appendices on our draft. But you know, I think that to Jim's point earlier is that people don't know, they're not going to learn about the tree ordinance until a tree affects them. And I would argue that trees are affecting us all the time. Anybody who's been in Atlanta is seeing rampant trees. And it's because we're building differently. We're building bigger. We're grading more when we build. It's kind of just a trend of how we're doing things right now. And we can do better, and we can make a balance. And we feel that we have found that balance when people are educated and know the kinds of approaches that we've done. We think that most people will really support the blended draft. Part of the frustrations I've had a little bit, and not necessarily with Mr. Cheeks, but you know, with others in the development community, is they are always saying, well, we love trees, but we love trees, but we love trees, but, and they never agree to any tree preservation ever. There's always a but in there. And so at some point, you got to roll up your sleeves and do the heavy lifting to figure out real balances that are practical in the real world. We feel like we've done that, and we would love other people to learn more about it and hopefully support the blended draft.
On that note.
Can I add one thing?
Oh yeah, sure.
All right. So we were, Chet, Catherine, members of council, a number of others were in a meeting a couple of weeks ago, obviously talking about this issue. And we started the meeting out, the council person started the meeting out with what would be the measure of success, exactly your question. And there has, I think it was in the Reed administration where this 50% canopy number was thrown out, and no one from the city's side could explain the science behind where that came from. There was discussion, sort of varying opinions on whether we're at 46 or at 48, whatever those numbers are in reality. And I don't think we necessarily disagree on what those numbers are, because it's static. It's what you see outside. But from a quantitative perspective, we spoke on this issue, I think, for 45 minutes and didn't really resolve it. We're for a goal that is increasing of the canopy now. Again, I think it goes back to the definition of, is it current canopy? Is it future canopy? Is it the health of the canopy, you know, especially in areas that are not being developed? We are in total support on what Mr. Tisdale just said. In fact, I was working with one council person almost 3 years ago to change the ordinance, the current ordinance, to allow for the Tree Trust Fund to be used on a means tested basis to remove legitimately dead, dying, or hazardous trees. So we do have a number of points at which we do agree. But again, back to your question, measure of success, we haven't even come up with exactly what that is yet. So we're talking about getting an ordinance voted on May 17th. I just don't see it.
I would like to comment on that just for a second, and that we have done a lot of site plan. We have analyzed site plans, and we have already seen what success looks like. And we invite anybody to walk through that process. We've invited people to sit with us and look at it. We have done dozens of site plans and shown how part of our comparison chart is based on that. If you do it the way we're doing it now, you're going to lose so many trees. If you do it the way the planning department, you're going to lose so many trees. If you do it the way we do it, you don't lose quite so many. Yes, you're still going to lose some. Some people will be very upset. There's a lot of people who probably say, oh, you spent all that time, we're still going to lose a lot of trees. But we're not going to lose quite as many. And success, there's actually a developer who actually consulted with us. I can't mention his name. One of the biggest developers in the city, very, very successful, said, you know what? People are coming to Atlanta. They're going to build. You're not going to run any risk that we're going to harm development. It's just going to be better. You're going to have houses with trees instead of houses with no trees. And everyone's going to have a house, and it will even drive diverse price point housing, because when you have a different answer, when every single answer is clear out that old house, grade the entire lot, and put up a big box, we get changes in neighborhoods that are all kind of one kind of price point. when we start to work around trees, some people may choose to renovate. Some people may hire an architect and actually have more interesting looking houses. So you can have value that isn't necessarily pure footprint. So we feel that we have done the homework. We have shown that this will work. Anyone who will sit down and look through site plans with us will see it. And we invite anyone to do that.
I'm about to close out my questions, but if anyone in the audience as participants have any questions, they can definitely put them in the chat in the Q&A, and the committee will ask on behalf of on their behalf to the panelists. So my last question for the evening right now, if it passes on May 17th, and we know, before you know it, May 17th will be here. We don't know, they might postpone it. They got a couple of weeks, they can postpone it. But if it does, how soon do you feel from your expertise that it needs to be revisited based on how quickly Atlanta is developing? Should we be waiting another 20 years, or should this be something that comes up every 5 or every 10 years, or, or as need, because I will say this, I'm a transplant. We mentioned this before. When I've lived here twice. When I first lived here, where I'm situated right now, which is considered like the West Midtown area. I put the quotes because, people who are from Atlanta don't call it West Midtown. But, when I first moved here the first time, I worked at the Georgia Dome, driving up, Howell Mill and Northside Drive and all the stuff like that to get back in home because I lived in Vinings. This area wasn't developed. I moved back 4 years later and been living in this neighborhood now for 8 years. And just this little pocket of the city has transformed into like almost another mini city. Just as many high rises are being built, townhomes are being built on these empty lots, they're clearing them. So from you guys' expertise, what do you think, if you can give advice to this council about bringing this up again? Okay. Should it be 20? Should it be 5? Should it be 10?
Yes. What we have put in the Citizens Group blended draft is provision for an urban forest master plan. It's actually been it's in current law, but it's never been implemented. It's required to be implemented immediately. We start immediately on it. And that urban forest master plan will contain measures in it to measure tree canopy, also to measure people's happiness or unhappiness with the existing process, because we do want to be sensitive to the homeowners being able to use the tree ordinance effectively if they have a problem with the tree, and the developer being able to use it effectively in their development process. So we put in there, in this urban forest master plan, the ability to come up with a plan to look at our canopy, see what's happening to it, to manage it, and to evaluate how the tree ordinance is working. And within that, you should have answer to the questions of how soon should we revisit the tree ordinance. It's something that the city has failed to do, and we've just got to get them to do it, because Atlanta needs a master plan that will allow us to measure what's going on with the tree ordinance. And we think it can be done. We don't think it's that hard. But I will say this, the city of Atlanta has been working on revising the tree ordinance since 2014. So this has been a 7-year process. And I know Jim is concerned about voting in May, but we have a crisis in the environmental movement. Crisis, the reverse of crisis is the opportunity. When the Cuyahoga River caught fire in Cleveland in the late 60s, that led to the Clean Water Act. And our tree crisis, I believe, will give us the opportunity to develop an ordinance that really will preserve our trees. And so this is a golden opportunity to preserve Atlanta's most precious natural resource. And I don't think we should try to put it aside. We should take advantage of it in every way that we can. And Katherine and I, I'm certain Jim will too, or will be available to people if they've got questions later. We're always happy to talk to people.
And we'll definitely share your contact information. Well, not your phone number. We'll send the emails. Anyone else opinion on?
I think, if we do vote on something in May, or if we vote on something a few months later or whatever, there's so much that we're not going to know. at the time. I think, and that's obviously true with almost every ordinance that's written, whether municipal, state, federal level. So I think it will depend on what those outcomes are. And I've got a feeling that council people, either way, whatever the ordinance is passed, are going to get a lot of an earful from constituents on both sides of the issue. And I think that will be the driver. But again, this issue is incredibly complicated. And I just hope we get it right the first time and we don't have to come back again. That's my personal hope.
I think that we could very very practically oriented. I think that we should look at it again in probably about 3 years. And the reason I say that is because there will be a lot of things that are going to be grandfathered. So we're not really going to see the changes for probably into the maybe 2-year mark. And I think that that we need to give it a little bit of time to kind of catch hold. And I think about 3 years about the right mark.
Well, that's the end of my questions that I have, but I believe we do have one community question, and Tori Hill, that's on the committee, is going to ask that one question.
Yes, I was interested to know, are there any aspects of the proposed tree ordinance that addresses the overall health of maintaining the health of existing trees? We've talked much about older trees, getting rid of trees, planting of new trees, but what about the maintaining the health of existing trees?
One of the things that we have, I believe the city has this, the city and we both have this in our draft, is that when people are going, they develop a lot and they're selling that house, they have to have cut all the invasive vines off the trees on the lot, so that you can't actually sell a house if there are invasive vines on the trees. And we also have another clause that actually we added this to our draft. There is a clause that says that the city arborist, if someone is afraid that there's a hazardous tree, maybe it has lots of English ivy or something like that on it, and it may fall on a sidewalk, the city will actually bring an arborist out to look at it. But if it was going to fall on a neighbor's house, they wouldn't. We changed it so that the city arborist can actually come and assess a hazardous tree that might fall on somebody else's private property. That happened to somebody I knew. So we added that. And we also, part of the urban forest management plan, some of the tree trust fund would be allotted to when the city buys like a park or a property. Some of that can be used for invasive species removal, which is to enhance the trees that we have. There's also what we'd like to see, and I'd like to kind of help with this because this is what I do in my organization, is do a lot more education about trees. A lot of people just don't know. There's kind of, people are afraid of trees. They're not sure why. And so what we'd like to do is see a lot of education so that people understand the trees in their yards more and know how to better take care of them. As an example, when people rake all their leaves up, and make those little kind of triangles at the base of a trunk, that's actually not healthy for the tree because there's so much moisture in there. You can actually introduce root rot, even though it's kind of an aesthetic thing that people do. There's just a lot of information out there. Trees, some of the trees in our ecosystem will live, certain species of oaks, our red oaks, our scarlet oaks, our post oaks, white oaks, some of our hickories, those trees will live, black gums will live for, 600 or 700 years, right? If we take care of them right. They're not, trees don't want to fall on our house. They've figured out millions of years how to stand up. So we just need to learn a little bit more about trees and educate people. I think that'll go a long way.
Thank you.
So I think the answer, as far as I'm concerned, is no. quite frankly, we've been pushing, like I said, me personally, along with a few council people, to add the allowance of tree trust fund money to be used to remove invasives from property that is not means tested, number one, that also is property that is not in development's way, and it hasn't made it into either draft. I'm not exactly sure why, but it's something that I'm pushing all of the council people. Hopefully it gets added at the end if there is an end in this short term. I think it's a travesty not to. By and large, builders are the ones that are paying into this fund, and it's the Home Builders Association and me personally pushing that more than anyone else.
I think the issue
that I know of.
Yeah, I think the issue with that, we looked into that, and there was, and I think council has a problem with this, taking public money and spending it on private lots is kind of tricky. You have to, can't do that quite directly. You have to figure out kind of ways to make that work. But we support a certain amount. I think we set aside a certain amount from the Tree Trust Fund to do those sorts of projects. But you have to, you can't just take public money and just spend it on private yards, because then you can make the same argument. Well, I want someone to fix my porch, and I want someone to fix my roof, right? I'm fixing my tree. So we're looking into that. I think we have to do that carefully.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you once again for participating in today. And like I said, this is our inaugural environmental talk series, and we're so super excited to start this. Taking over the League of Women Voters as president almost a year now. We were going through some of the older papers, and League of Women Voters, Atlanta, Fulton County used to do a lot of environmental talks, but that was before smaller groups. Oh, look at it, Dougie. That's before, groups started, separating, so then you had your environmentalist group. So why would you go to League of Women Voters to talk about environmental issues? You'll have, all different groups. And so we are so excited to bring this back into the fold of League of Women Voters, and especially with the tree ordinance as its inaugural event. I do want to say first, thank you to Chet, Jim, and Katherine. Like I said, it is Earth Day. I know a lot of you guys, you could have been on anybody else's panel today. So we definitely appreciate you joining us this evening. I do want to give a special shout out to the programs committee and the VP, Chinye and Tori are representing the program. And thank you also, she's not as a panelist, but I know she's on, Sarah Wilson. She is actually our city council observer, and she brought this ordinance to us. Part of our board and committees, we have different observers that observe different parts, like the city, the county, and the state. And she's our city observer, and she brought this to us and was talking about this is the hot button that was going on. And, of course, as my board has noticed, I'm one of those big thinkers, like, well, we need to do something about it. We need to have this discussion, and that's kind of what I threw out to the two of them. And I said, Sarah and Shinya, get it together. We need a discussion. Let's do it on Earth Day. And, I want to say thank you so much for putting that together with my crazy thoughts that I always have when I think of programs. With that, one, League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization, and we always like to say that. So, we're, as many of you have been talking about, hopefully I'm not frozen. It looks like I'm frozen on my end. You can still hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. So we are so about educating, empowering, and engaging our citizens, especially in the city of Atlanta and Fulton County. And things like this is important for them, because we are the largest city, we are the largest county, and our demographics spread from inner city to, as you go through, Sandy Springs, or you're going south, you'll get a lot more, like I would say, vegetation versus being in the middle of the city. So something like this is important for everybody, because this affects a lot of us day to day. With that, we also are going off, and I'm going to tell everyone about our two events that are coming up that are also very important. Next, we're going to have up next Tuesday. I have two events back to back. So next Tuesday on April 27th, we will be breaking down SB 202. Same thing, educating our constituents about what really is in SB 202, not just what the media is talking about, it's not just about water. And IDs for absentee ballots. There's, like I said, it's a 96-page bill, and we have actually the president for the League of Women Voters Georgia and Helen Butler are going to lead that discussion to talk about really breaking down all the sections of that bill and how it affects Georgians. After that, I'm actually leading a special committee, and we are a redistricting committee. As most people know, that redistricting across the country is about to happen. Redistricting and reapportionment is about to happen due to the census coming out. And with the delay of census, it's given us an opportunity to really start educating people on it. You know, we're coming out of an election cycle. It gives us a little breathing room to kind of really come back in and start educating people about what that means. And so we're launching a 4-part series on April 29th. And the first one is Redistricting 101. And then we'll go into empowering our citizens, and that will be talking more about, now that you know what it means and what it stands for, how you as citizens can continue to fight and understand about fair mapping. And then we'll have 3 more parts that we are hopefully will have town hall discussions with the state committees, both from the House and both from the Senate, to talk about it and letting the residents have their say about fair mapping. And that is our goal, to kind of make sure that we have fair mapping within the city of Atlanta and within Fulton County and along with the state of Georgia. If you are interested in joining the League of Women Voters, we are a non-biased gender organization. So, you know, my men, Jim, Chet, you can become members, so we are not gender biased. And as I stated before, we have folks from all across the aisles and all different parties are representative in our group. You know, from third parties to obviously Republicans and Democrats, we represent them all. And we are here, like I said before, it's just to make sure we have educated voters, educated residents before they go to the polls and before they talk to their representatives for this city and this county. Once again, thank you so much. And if you are interested, we are at LWVAF.org. Thank you and have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you.